Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
Brandon, great show tonight. The listeners will remember Roger Kitchen Jr., who is the founder and mental skills coach for Power Mental Performance. And he's bringing one of his clients, somebody he's worked with for the last couple of years, Caleb Kimbrough, who's the head coach at Hampden-Sydney College in Farmville, Virginia. They're coming on to talk about some of the things that they've been doing over the last couple of years. And man, I mean, it's had a big impact on that program. And, you know, it's funny, the program itself, I'm from Virginia, or spent the last 19 or 20 years there before moving down here to Nashville. And I can tell you that's a program that plays in that ODAC, that Old Dominion Athletic Conference up there, had a lot of success. Then, you know, just kind of went through some periods there towards the end, right before Caleb came on board, where it just wasn't working the way it had been. Sure. I think, if I'm not mistaken, when Coach K took over, it was like in third or fourth losing season in a row. And he came in with a plan, as we talk about so often, right? I mean, just having a plan and then starting to be very intentional about it.
Well, he had a plan, and then he started to figure out how to put all that process together. I mean, he had the process, but it was really, and I think the listeners are really going to enjoy this, because you get to hear how somebody like Roger gets, you know, an opportunity to work with a program and work with Coach K, and then hear how that's actually paying dividends out on the court and even away from, you know, the court. So, yeah, you know, what I really enjoy about what we're doing here with the podcast and what we have the opportunity to see and hear is that the mental performance side of things is not only is it something that is being adopted across almost every sport, men, women, across the board. It's starting to really pay off for people and for programs. We touch on it briefly, but I was floored on, I think it was on Sunday when Marquette was playing, and it was about a minute to go.
Big moment.
Huge moment. Yeah. And they cut to the sideline reporter, who I think was Tracy Wolfson. I think I could be wrong here. And they said, hey, you know, because they're always reporting on what happened in the huddle and what the coaches were saying and all that. And they're like, hey, you know, what was Shaka Smart doing? And she was almost at a loss for words. She goes, well, they spent the first 30 seconds of the timeout just breathing. Yeah. And I'm sitting on the sofa, and I just put my hands up, and there's no one in the house. Right. And I'm like, they're doing it. Like, this is real. Like, they're doing it. Like, the stuff that we've been talking about for years is here. And to hear the response, like, I don't really know how to report on this. They were intentionally breathing. And anyway, I found it really interesting, because we've had probably close to a dozen guests, and the last one being Dr. Matt Park, who was like, they live on intentional breathing. I mean, it's one of the skills. So anyway, I think it's great.
Yeah, no. And look, I mean, we talk about this. I think I actually even mentioned it in this one, is that old expression about you got to be in the moment to win the moment. But it's like, this even goes beyond sports, like you're talking about. Like, you're just starting to see this happen everywhere. Like, you're starting to see business leaders and people in what we would, quote unquote, normal walks of life who are just being more mindful, taking time to, whether it's through meditation or whatever, at the beginning of the day, understanding like, look, I've got to figure out a way to clear my mind a little bit, get rid of some of these thoughts, this vehicle of mine that's in my head that keeps going forward all the time. And just really kind of settling things down. And I agree with you. It's like, I love the fact that Shaka is like, recognizes, first of all, that his players are like, who wouldn't be, right? I mean, there's so much on the line and the game is such a tight thing. To have the wherewithal and the know-how to see the value in saying, I only got a minute here, but I'm going to spend 30 seconds of this just getting them back to where they're not in the future. They're not in the past. I need them to be right here with me right now.
100%.
So speaking of Matt Park and Roger Kitchen and, Caleb Kimbrough, we've got a lot of great guests coming up as well. And look, we have one that, hopefully we're going to be getting on pretty soon. That's somebody that you brought to us in Craig Wiggins, right?
Yeah. So Craig's probably going to come back, and he's actually got it's their first annual drive for, they're calling it Drive and Dine charity event for the Heels to Toe for Heroes event. It's going to be at the BMW Performance Center in Greer, South Carolina.
Very cool.
I would highly, highly, highly encourage the listeners to go check it out, see if you can potentially attend. I've done what they're going to be doing. They open up the BMW track and they will take cars out and you can drive them, and you can drive them very fast. And you can
sweet invite, by the way. I mean,
yes.
Thanks for that.
We got it. So,
okay. Well, I mean, that's right. But it seems like you took it, and I got the invite too.
100%. And so, but it'll be on May 4th, from 4 until 7. And they're working to raise money for, a cause called Tunnel to Towers and for the Heels to Toe group. So I would encourage the listeners to go out. It's on Facebook. If you'll look up for HT4H Drive and Dine charity event, it'll take you to it. You can see the tickets. You can sign up. It's really fun. I have done it. And being able to drive those high performance cars really fast around a track. Sometimes, like, it depends on the cars they have. They'll have, you can get on a wet track and kind of, drift and all that kind of stuff. So it's really cool. So, it's really fun to see, former guests doing great things like Roger's doing with Coach K.
No, and what a great cause. I'm so happy for Craig and that organization. I remember, there are certain guests we've had on here, and we talk about all of the different strategies and tactics of the mental performance side of things. And then, I remember one of the things that left such a big impact on me after Craig's guest spot was just how much we need to help those veterans, and the things 100%. That he's doing with that organization is really good. So I'm excited for Craig and for that event. So definitely for the listeners, go find a way to support it. And like we talked about before, if you go on that website, maybe you can't make it down to Greer that particular day.
Sure.
Find another way to support them. And speaking of other guests coming up, we have Brian Davidson next week on the shows, the founder of MindVue, MINDVUE. And you talk about looking forward to a conversation. I mean, this is a conversation that's going to be around, measuring and developing grit and resilience and motivation in leaders and athletes and students and employees and all the things we like to talk about. But there's some really cool ways that he has found to assess some of these things. And I think the listeners will really find it very, very fascinating. So definitely looking forward to that conversation next week with Brian Davidson. But as we always say, in the meantime, we got a good one for you tonight. Get your pen and paper ready, because we have Caleb Kimbrough and Roger Kitchen Jr. All right, as you heard from the introduction there, we have two special guests tonight, Brandon. We've got Coach Caleb Kimbrough from Hampden-Sydney College, of course, in Farmville, Virginia, and then also Roger Kitchen Jr., who the listeners will remember from previous shows. Of course, Roger is the founder of Mental Skills Coach for Power Mental Performance. So, Coach Kimbrough, first of all, congratulations on a fantastic season for you guys. I mean, you had to be pretty fired up. Everybody really buzzing around the campus right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you know anything about Hampden-Sydney, I mean, not unlike probably anywhere, people get excited about winning. And we were able to win some games this year. It was exciting. But I think more importantly, people saw the process of a similar group, go from progressing over a span of time, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the things that I know you and Roger have kind of worked together on the mental performance side of things for the last couple of seasons. But I want to just go over a couple of these stats for the listeners. Finished this year with a 22-7 record, first NCAA tourney appearance since 2013, 14-2 during the ODAC regular season, and then of course, the best season in 10 years, final ranking in the top 20. It's interesting, Coach, prior to your arrival, I know this program had some success, 10 ODAC titles, 14 NCAA tournament appearances, but they had, endured 3 straight losing seasons. And one of the things I thought was really interesting, which made me think about this buzz around campus, is you had told people when you were hired that you wanted to start to pull everybody together and create pride in Hampden-Sydney basketball again. I'd say you can kind of check that one off the box right now, don't you think? It's a pretty good season to get people back fired up again.
Yeah, I mean, I can't take all the credit. We've had a lot of coaches that have helped me. Got Bryson Gibson is one of my assistants that's been with me the whole time. Carson Long's here right now. He's doing a phenomenal job. And honestly, you got guys that you recruit players that want to come into a program. They've got to believe in the school. They've got to believe in what you're telling them. So I give them a lot of credit for sticking with it. I mean, we pulled some players that could have gone to places that were winning right then, and they gave us a chance. And I think they got to see it this year. I mean, the crowds this year it was amazing. I mean, Hampden-Sydney is part of what this place does is, it supports at a high level for a small liberal arts school. And I mean, it was rocking in there, in these home games. We didn't have a ton of home games this year, but the ones we did, towards the end, man, it was fun.
It's something about that buzz of the arena. And I don't know, all of a sudden, Brandon, why buzz was my focus word today or something. I've used it now 4 times in this show, and I might have used it, twice the entire time we've been on the doing this podcast. But, Coach, before we get into some of the great stuff you and Roger did, I did want to, just so that listeners kind of get acclimated to some things. So you played basketball at Guilford College from 2004 to 2008. What was it about coaching? I mean, was that one of those things you just knew from the get-go you always wanted to get into to be a coach when you were done playing?
I wasn't like the gung-ho guy that was drawing up plays on the clipboard. Growing up, I wasn't that. I love sports always. So I played several sports in high school, like tennis and football, soccer. I tried them all. And I really love the team aspect of sport. I was never the leading scorer or that kind of guy, but, I always wanted to win. And to do that, you kind of had to, pull everybody together. So I think as I got older, everybody started to say, wow, you could be, this could be something that you could be good at. I think so it became a thought because of that and because of the love of sport, I think. But yeah, I did the whole camp thing when I was in school, went and worked camps at Division I schools like Davidson and close by Guilford, UNC. I'm from Chapel Hill, and that turned into forming some relationships and then seeing other people do it and get excited about that. But once I got it, Washington Lee was my first job. Adam Hutchinson gave me a chance there, and it was, being there, I had no idea what I was doing, first of all, no clue. But just, trying to help somebody and teach them and watch them progress that became like, oh man. And then doing it with something that you love to do, like being around basketball at the same time, that was, for me, I was like, oh yeah, I've got to try to do this. I got to see if I'm any good at this, and been lucky enough to be where I am now.
Well, I think, talking about that, watching people progress, and this was one of the things that really impressed me as I was researching for this show, is that idea of watching people progress, get better, keeping that growth mindset. That's something you were really intentional about when you came on campus. I mean, I looked back at I don't know if it was a press conference that you did to announce your hiring, or just some different articles, but I mean, you had mentioned in a Richmond Times article, and I don't know if this was just a one-off interview or that they had shown up at a press conference or something, that when you were first hired, you said it's going to be about moving forward, figuring out how we can have little successes here and there and kind of buy into the whole process of growth. And then, so I was real impressed with that. But then I see this year where the season's over, and you were talking to one of the local newspapers, and you said, this is now all about getting the guys back together, getting some individual meetings set up, and start asking the question of what can we do to be better, which I was really impressed with, because I think, and we talk about that modeling all the time as a coach, and how important it is to demonstrate, how you all are continuously self-assessing to get your players to buy into that. That idea of asking that question to players, how can we get better, whether that is as a program, whether it's as a coaching staff or whatever, I think it just kind of feeds that idea of growth mindset. So kudos to you for that. Is that something that you and Roger and everybody's just trying to continue to put into the fiber of the program?
Without a doubt. And Roger's helped tremendously with that. I think it's one thing to say growth mindset, or to
right
1,000 books, and you read them and you study it and you figure out, how do I implement this? It's another thing to get your team to be present. I mean, to like really commit to the task at hand when you lose a game or several games or whatever the case is. Like, how are you? We got to get better, or we beat a team by 30. Oh, okay, let's figure out how to get better. It's that's tough, and also balance that with, we want to win. Like, the result is important for us. It's not, the result's not like, oh, don't worry about the result. No, we want to win. It's important. So we've got to continually figure out how to progress and get better and commit to that. The results take care of themselves. And if it's not the result that we need to get, like, we've got to work a little harder and adjust and do these things. And, I think that is the fun. I mean, there's a lot of frustration in it, but there's a lot of fun in that.
Yeah. Roger, you got to be happy to hear that, right? I mean, from your angle, and first of all, before I ask that question about how you're kind of reinforcing that from your side of things, how did this all evolve? How did you and Coach Kimbrough hook up? What was that process like?
It was actually a mutual friend we had. So,
oh, wow.
A mutual friend that's here in Huntsville, who's a basketball coach, and I'd worked with some of his teams here locally. And then as I was, I was growing Power Mental Performance, and I just said, look, if you know of any coaches, especially at the college level, that you think would benefit from what I do, please connect me. And he connected me with 3 different coaches, and Coach K was one of them. And so we just set up a time to talk. And, Caleb, I think we just kind of hit it off. And as we started talking, and anytime I meet a coach, I always want to know, like, what's the culture of the programs like? How's this coach wired? What's his coaching philosophy or her coaching philosophy? And really just get to understand the person. And it didn't take long that I was like, we got to make this work. Just because of how Caleb's wired, his philosophy, just how he runs a program, everything. And then Hampden-Sydney is a really special program just within the country. So, I just think a lot of things fell in place, and kind of the rest is history.
So it's really interesting when you talk about culture and a new coach comes in, right? Because usually a new coach is coming in because the program has either hit kind of a downturn, or they've had a ton of success and the coach is moving on to a different program, right? So So when you're coming into a college or into a program that suffered through 3 straight losing seasons, and even to, like John mentioned before, where you go, hey, we're going to go ahead and focus on the progress and maybe not the perfection, right? But results do matter. When you're putting that together, how difficult is it, or where did you find the biggest challenge in terms of getting everybody to kind of buy in and go, hey, this is different, we are different, and how long does that take, Coach and Roger, because you play a vital role in that as well? How do you get those young, impressionable athletes to be like, you know what, he's right, we are different, and let's get after this thing?
Roger, you want me to start?
And you roll, and I'll chime in.
Yeah, the culture piece. I'm very passionate about the culture piece, like creating this unbreakable foundation, as we like to call it. Something you just stand on and build upon. I think I am not going to sit here and pretend like we haven't won a championship. So it's funny when you go to these interviews, people are like, oh, what's your culture? Like, what's your coaching philosophy? My answer in those interviews have always been, I'm working on it,
Right.
I love that.
Confident in these areas, but definitely not sharp yet because we haven't achieved some of the things we want to do. But I was very lucky that one of the alum here that has been a huge supporter of the basketball program, and he's a big business guy, and we began to talk about the whole, organizational development of our culture. And he took it to another level as far as my thought of, I want a player-led team, right? And here's what I do. Like, I feel like I'm a hard worker. I feel like I incorporate these guys, like a family environment, try to bring a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and these 3 words, right? Or these things that we hang on. But how do you get your team, it to become your team's thing? I think that's the hard piece, whether you take over a good program or a program that's struggling. And, the term shared accountability is what he brought to the table that kind of changed the game. I think for me was, wow, this is going to take some time. Like, we've got to incorporate the players, and we have to ask them, what are our goals? How are we going to achieve them? What values do we need to hang on together? What standards do we need to have as a program? Let's all come up with these. Man, we did that. It took almost like first 2 years. I mean, to build that, and it's a continual process. But what's happened because of that is there is that accountability that nobody can run from.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything is related to the program. It's not a personal thing. It's not, Coach, what are you talking about? I'm like, what are you talking? We did this together, man. Like, what? Come on, let's go. And they can do the same thing to me, and that's I think, like, the beauty of, it's our program. This is just how we operate. Like, let's get it done.
Yeah. So when we connected 2 years ago, they were just, it's so interesting for Brandon. We had this conversation about culture, how a business person that's part of their alumni network was coming in and helping Caleb in terms of vision, mission, core values. Absolutely. How do you get buy-in? How do you build the program? How do you maintain that accountability? And the alumni and I had the same business background because I talked to them when I was up there a couple of years ago. And so when Caleb and I started, meeting, I was asking them the same questions, and he's like, "We're working on it." But they had really gotten to a place where they knew what their vision was: be the standard of basketball in D3, the standard of excellence, SOE, be the standard of excellence in Division III basketball. And they had their mission, they had their core values, the Tiger DNA, and they had come up with these different slogans like "Get it done," GID, no excuses. And so all this stuff was just there. So I think when I came on board, I was just adding adding a little bit more in terms of the mental performance piece, because I felt like they have a strong leader in Caleb, and his coaching staff is solid. And he started rebuilding the program around these core values and these principles and what he was, and really he's passionate about it. So like, that's what, and he's authentic too. And so like when the players meet him and see how he operates, you ask every player in that locker room, why did you choose Hampden-Sydney? They're like, Coach K, because of his authenticity and his leadership and what he's trying to build. And look, you guys know Hampden-Sydney has a rich tradition in basketball. So who wouldn't want to be a part of that? Right. And so that, trying to make that happen again is just exciting for the guys on the team. Now your culture, maintains everything, and the leadership, of the players and the leadership from Coach K and his staff, just, it's just taking it to another level.
That's awesome. I know too, that because we talk to coaches a lot, and they all have varying opinions about this. Because it's real interesting to me as a coach when you come in and you start setting the culture. One of the things that as a former athlete that always interests me is, so now do you recruit to your culture, right? Or is your culture strong enough that you just go get who you need to get to fill the role that needs to be filled, and trust that culture is going to provide that accountability and that the team, like you said, coach, is led, player led. But do you recruit to the culture, or do you let the team and the culture take care of itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think you try to be, I think that the building of the culture is like an ongoing project, right? And I think we have to be smart and continue to adjust and listen to the guys that are in your program. As far as recruitment goes, I think you do as much digging as you can, and the things that are you have non-negotiables, right? But I think for us, we try not to, nitpick to the point where, oh man, this guy, he doesn't check every box of every single one because we really don't know. We've not had the guy in a practice, we go watch him practice, but
sure.
He says he's coachable, this kind of thing. He's great with his teammates. So, we view those things and we make like a very educated decision, I feel like, based on those. But I do think you rely on your the guys in your program to protect what has been developed and understand like, hey, if someone doesn't get with the program, right, it's going to become very clear. I think that we talk about that a lot. We've gotten to the point where it's very clear if there's someone that's not with it. And we weren't always there. It was blended before, 50-50 early on, and you kind of don't know, hey, who's getting with it, who's not. And so it's hard to have those conversations and be vulnerable. You don't know what's going on. And now we really feel like, wow, okay, this guy's really sticking out, guys. Okay, we either need to try to reel him in or do we let him go? What's one or two directions? There's no gray area. You're coming this way or you're gone.
Yeah. Well, and look, it's the beauty, and we have talked to coaches about this before, but it's the beauty of why it's so important to establish that culture, that Tiger DNA for you guys is when you have those standards of excellence that you guys are preaching all the time and the players have bought into it. Now, all of a sudden, from a recruit standpoint, that becomes very attractive. Young athletes want to have that standard. They like to be coached, the good ones especially. They want the feedback. They like to be coached, but they want to come to a place in their parents as well that there's going to be some standards, some core principles. Roger and I both kind of came up through the same mental performance training. And, one of the things that Brian Cain talks about with the principles is core principles. It's that in your heart, these are things you truly believe. And now all of a sudden it's that, why culture is so important is it's what leads when nobody's watching. It's that every player has those standards. And now all of a sudden I think probably find that it's easier to recruit because when somebody says, why Hampden-Sydney, you're ready to go with the answer. You've got, this is why, this is what we're looking for. What's a Hampden-Sydney player look like? This is what they look like. And you can rattle those things off, and it just makes that recruiting pitch, if you will, so much more polished because they can see it in you that you believe it when you're talking about it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. It's going through the process of just being a lot more intentional about the words, because the words we use in our Tiger DNA, like the word thankful or intelligent or grit, those are words thrown around in every program. I think the beauty of going through the process is we can tell you exactly what each word means to us, right? And that's so we just feel. I mean, we don't know what other people do. We just feel like, yeah, we're passionate when we talk about it. It's not just throwing the word out there. Even like the word family, right? That has a specific meaning to us. And yeah, we talk about it every day. I mean, it's something that's the guys are really believing in, and it's a fun. Yeah, it gets me fired up. I mean,
no, I mean, look, it's you hit on something that we've talked about on this show before, but young coaches listen, and young business leaders, because I love the fact that, Caleb, you guys were already talking to a business guy, and he's sharing with you some ways to develop that culture from a business standpoint, because the things we talk about on this show are so universal. It can be applied to athletics. It can be applied to the business arena. But one of the things that you talked about was, when you are establishing a culture, it's so critical to make it an everyday thing, not a sometime thing, but an every time thing. And that you're holding people accountable for it, that you're catching them doing it right. When you're trying to establish a culture, you got to make sure when you see it being displayed, you reward the behavior you wish to see repeated. And I think that's one of the key things for a coach early on, is to make sure, if I'm trying to establish this thing. So Roger or Caleb, either one of you, what are some things you guys did or tried to implement that maintain that momentum? So now you're kind of getting this culture established. What are some ways that you guys are doing around campus, during practice, on the court, during games, whatever the case may be?
Coach, go ahead, and then I'll trail you.
I've been talking a lot, man. You go ahead, Roger.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the day in, day out, I think that's a Coach K question. What I can tell you in terms of consistency is, like, I've been around the program a lot. I've traveled with them, and every single time I'm engaged with them over the last 2 years, it's the same. Like, nothing changes. And somebody could go, well, that may not be good. No, that is good. So, like, we know the culture's there, and it's consistent. It's predictable. We know what we're doing. As Coach K said, we make adjustments, and we improve where we need to improve, and we self-assess quite a bit. And so in terms of how we keep the momentum going, I think it's just the program. It's the intentionality of the program and the guys buying in and having some really good leadership on the team. The older guys that, like I said, you just, as Coach K and his staff go out and recruit, they know they can assess pretty quick who's going to be a good fit and who may struggle.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I think the day in, what we've taken from Roger, what's been so helpful to us. Well, Roger's coming from Alabama, so we try to time our trips. Like a weekend. We came to Franklin and Marshall. We had a tournament early in the year. It's come to, we have a tip-off banquet, which is all the alums are at. It was a perfect thing for him to come to, and a couple other events, which is amazing. Our conference tournament. And in those, when he's around, we'll do team sessions.
Yeah.
We'll work, that kind of thing, which is amazing. Otherwise, it's kind of Zoom, or individual or team where you can connect. But I think one of the really nice things is in every session, there's like something that maybe clicks with the team. And Roger, sometimes it's maybe like a small point you're trying to make. Maybe sometimes it's the big point you're trying to make. But this year in particular, there's a specific moment up at Franklin and Marshall. So we went into the season, everybody was excited. We had a lot of returners, and we go play our first game and we lose on the road. And everybody thought we should have won the first game. So everybody's just completely down to start the whole year. And then we immediately go to this tournament in Pennsylvania where it's actual tournament style, back to back, 4 teams, and Roger
and solid teams too. Like it wasn't a lightweight tournament.
And one of the sessions, I mean, I think we were all playing with a lot of emotion that was distracting us from, like we learned from Roger, staying neutral. And one of the things that, one of the cues for us that we used that Roger taught us was palms down, right? Like,
yeah.
And, the actual palms down. Well, man, you guys would, I ought to send you the film. You see the whole bench.
I love that.
The whole game, the whole tournament. You got players looking at me. I'm getting on official, like, coach. And, I mean, but like it really stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting, next play speed was another thing that really with the team, getting to the next play as quickly as you can, next game, whatever. And the palms down and the next play speed, those two things, just right off the bat, I'm like, wow, those things, like right now to this day, like I can be walking to lunch and, oh man, they got what? Coach, palms down, man. Come on, man. Let's, it's even like that, which is exactly what you would want in my mind.
Right.
Like,
absolutely.
Oh, man, this is something they're thinking about. Like they can joke about it, but it's also used in a very serious way. It's just been great.
I love
so there's
to
just
hear...
those.
Go ahead, Roger. I'm sorry.
I was going to say there's those foundational mental skills that we teach into the program that now are a part of the program.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, back to what Caleb was saying, I remember that session where we talked palms down, and you guys know it because of Graham Betchart was on your show.
Absolutely.
So Graham's a friend of mine, and I showed the team what he was doing with Sacramento Kings.
Yep.
And it was so funny because I said, okay, like if you get blown, like a ref blows a call on you, it's like your fourth or your fourth foul. Like, what's the national body language? Everybody in the room's like this, right?
Right.
I said, you guys need to turn your palms the other way and go palms down as a reminder to stay calm. And like they just, it was Caleb. It was wild, wasn't it? It was like, I don't know. It was like magic in the room, and then it stuck. But then there's been other things that we've talked about too that just stuck in the different team building sessions that I do with the team. And, once the guys pick it up, now it's part of the program. They pick up these different things in the mental performance program and now they just stick. And so it's next play speed. It's, palms down. It's stay neutral. Another big one is control your controllables. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about playing in the zone, control what you can control, and you train your mind not to focus on anything outside of your control. So we talk about controlling our controllables a lot as well. So again, just these foundational principles, it's less is more, and we keep it super simple so that you can easily talk about what is palms down, what does it mean, how do you do it, and guys will just pick it up real quick. So those, but Caleb and the team reinforce. I think this is where we were going with this. How do you make it stick? How does it stay consistent? The coaches are reinforcing this every practice. Like we rep it out in practice so that it happens in games.
Right.
So like we're working on next play speed in practice. We're working on palms down in practice. We're staying neutral. We're controlling what we can control. And the quality, the intentionality and the quality of the practices that I always see is super high. Like it is always 100%. And they focus on the quality. Like their practice squad would be like give regular teams a fit in games because their practice squad is just that good. The quality's there, and they take a lot of pride in what they do.
That's
awesome.
amazing,
Brandon.
So I'm really curious because I love hearing the acceptance and the adoption of these things, right? And so. I mean, Roger, we've talked about it a little bit with you and Coach K. I'm curious as to 5-10 years ago, would you have had that same adoption of, athletes seem to be a lot different. I mean, I can tell you that John and I, if you would have come to us in the 90s and said, hey, palms down, you might have gotten a palm across your face. Like nobody would have been like, the hell is he talking about? Palms down. Like, yeah. So how has that evolution of the mental side of this found its way, and what is your take on it? I mean, because we've talked to other mental professionals at Clemson and Mississippi State and Alabama. They're using mental performance now as a recruiting tool, because they're like, hey, look, not only are we going to get you ready for the next level in the NFL, we're actually going to teach you how to be mentally and stable and be able to absorb all this other stuff that's out in the zeitgeist now. So how has that been adopted, and what would you attribute it to?
Yeah. I mean, professional athletes accepting and talking about these things, like the influence of people in those type of positions, I think has been really key. Cause you can I think you can call it whatever you want, mental skills, you can call it a lot of different things, but yeah, even when I was in college playing sports, I would have thought of it as a weakness if someone come in and talk to me about being mentally stronger. And I think when you see somebody at peak performance in basketball, for LeBron James, doing a breathing exercise, or NCAA tournament, like Shaka Smart.
Did you see Shaka?
Right.
Shaka calls a timeout in the first 30 seconds. They're just in there doing intentional breathing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Like that kind of thing right there, I think is like credibility. Okay. Right. Coaches are like, well, I think it takes that sometimes. I mean, personally for me, it became, I didn't know if it was going to be a useful tool for the players. Like I didn't know if they were going to take it serious. Like you bring in a mental skills coach for these college guys, 18 to 22, you have no idea if they're just going to laugh at you or they'll take it serious because they'll know I'll rip them a new one. Yeah. But are they going to really take it anywhere past that? I think that what the connection to Roger's been great. And part of it for me was, oh, wow, if anything else, I think this can help our staff be better at teaching and motivating, right? And utilizing tools. And initially I thought, well, maybe we need to hide some of these resources that Roger's going to talk about and utilize them, but not call them mental skills, right? Or do it in a way that the team's still going to respond. But I think the influence of, all these people that are on TV and, everybody knows, has been great. It's been unbelievable. I mean, it's allowed people to be more vulnerable. I think COVID had something to do with it a little bit, to be honest with you.
Sure.
For sure.
Locked inside a little bit, but yeah.
Well, and I also think when they see the results, right? I mean, that's one thing about today's athlete is when they see that everything, we've got 500 channels they can watch on TV. There's all the different, platforms they can get access to different videos and stuff. And what it does, it divides attention and it teaches this thing about what's next, what's the next best thing and all of that. But when they start seeing results, then you're going to get more and more buy-in. And with you guys, that next play speed is so critical in basketball because the game is at such a fast pace that if you aren't turning the page to that next play or that next possession or next trip down the court, you're missing 3 or 4 different things. The next thing you know, you're sitting next to Coach K there on the bench and you're seeing everything pretty well at that point, I would imagine. But when you're in the middle of that game and the rhythm's going, if you're a basketball player that's hanging on the bad shot that you took earlier, and maybe it was a shot that you wish you had back or whatever, but sometimes they get out of that focus and start focusing on those uncontrollables because once the release happens, they can't control the outcome. It doesn't matter what all of the mechanics in the world. Once that ball leaves the palm and the fingers, it's either going to go in or it's not going to go in. So beyond that, it's time to move on to the next thing. Roger, is that something that you found the players that you had to really be intentional about that idea? Like, well, it's hard to do it, or you can do it for maybe the first 5 minutes in the half, but then in the latter part of the half, it gets a little bit harder, right? Because everybody buys in as long as they're shooting good. But all of a sudden now when it starts to, you start to play bad, now it's like, don't give me that palms down stuff. I don't want to hear that right now. I'm in my own thing.
Yeah. So it's tough. So like mental skills is a skill just like any other skill, right? It takes time. And that's what I say. We rep it out in practice so that if your shot isn't going in practice, you learn how to adjust in practice and you learn how to move on to the next play. You can control what you can control. How you even talk to yourself in those moments is super critical. So, you could even just tell yourself next play speed, or you have some cue, visual or verbal. But when you rep it out in practice, it makes game time a lot easier. Every player is a little bit different in terms of personality, emotional makeup. So some things work for some and not others. And, I had a conversation with one of the guys on the team last time I was with the team. This guy's a 3-point baller. Like he's just money. And there's times where he'll struggle because he'll miss a few shots and then he just kind of, he'll get inside his head. And like, I was just shagging rebounds for him last time. And I said, what's Steph Curry's 3-point percentage right now? And he goes, I don't know. I said, it's 41%. Mm-hmm. I said, so he misses 6 shots out of 10. And he just kind of looked at me. I said, he only makes it 40% of the time. He misses 6 out of 10 and he's going to be a Hall of Famer. And it's like, oh, okay. So a lot of times it's just a subtle shift in perspective and thinking that can make the difference. But then again, it's just the repping out in practice and let's put it in, let's play with it, have some freedom to find what works for you. Learn to make mistakes and recover. In fact, I was listening to Graham today on a podcast, and when he was working with Aaron Gordon, who's now with the Nuggets, Aaron would beat himself up for missing shots. And he's like, the best of the best missed it 50, 60% of the time. So he told Aaron, I need you to miss shots. And Aaron's like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, I need you to miss so that you can learn to recover. And so that's, you don't wait till game time to figure this stuff out. You got to do it day in, day out when you're grinding on the hardwood.
One of my, and I know you've probably worked with them on this, Roger, but E plus R equals O, right? It's that response to the event equals outcomes. One of my favorite things I've heard about this was from Dr. Mo, has been a regular guest on this show. He's a sports psychologist on the PGA Tour. And one of his first episodes with us, he talked about this idea that there's 2 natural responses to action in any sporting event. So if I do something the right way, if it's a good action and it has a good response, I'm naturally going to be in a positive mindset there. If I do something bad action wise and it has a bad response or bad outcome, I'm naturally going to be upset and pissed off with myself, right? Those are both natural. It's the ones that are in the middle. It's the ones that if I have a bad action that ends up in a good result, even, some sloppy shot or misguided shot Coach K didn't want me to take, but it still goes in. And it's that, well, no from a coach. And he's like, yeah, way to go. Get back down the floor or whatever. But then it's also the times when you have good action with a bad result. So he said, if your natural inclination is to be pissed off at both of those, one because you had a bad action, even though it had a good result, and the other because you had a bad result from a good action, now 75% of the time or the actions that you take on the floor are all going to leave you pissed. That's not a very positive place to be as an athlete, right? Is 75% of the things you do out on the basketball court or on the golf course or whatever leave you upset and pissed. That's not good. So that's why I think it's so important to reframe that and get those players back, like you're talking about, into, okay, how do I respond from this? How do I turn the page even if it is bad action, but I got a good result from it? How do I turn the page even if it was good action and I got a bad result? Like all of those things are important because now 75% of the time I'm in a positive frame of mind. I'm not ever going to probably get to 100%, But if I can get there where it's, but if I can get there when it's 75% of the time, I'm maintaining that level of focus, staying in the moment to win the moment, like all of those things, then I think that's a really good space to be in.
Well, that's why we want them to be in that neutral space. So learning, so you're not assigning any type of emotion to what you do. You're staying neutral. Are you going to be, basketball is an emotional sport. So the emotion are going to be there, but the really great ones manage it well. Yeah, they're going to tweak and they're going to, but they bring themselves back quickly and they just get to that neutral space, however they want to do it. Something visual, something verbal, they breathe, whatever. But they get back to that neutral space. And then I think the winning way of what you're talking about is outside of a game now, outside of practice, where I can sit and reflect.
Yep.
And it's hard. College kids, it's hard to do because of their schedule, social life, academics, all that. But if I can sit back and reflect, why do I do what I do? And really ask, dig deep and go, oh, now I understand it. Then, that's where you kind of win.
Yeah.
That way you can understand what that trigger is.
You got it.
Know what that trigger is so that you can maintain it or you manage it and then maintain your neutral space.
But they also, that reflection is so important. And to your point, Roger, so few athletes do that. It really is. And it's something that like I'm trying to work with my son at 15 to be like, hey, dude, like you're on to the next thing. You haven't learned anything or seen, like we talk about success leaves clues, right?
Right.
Well, you haven't even looked to see what was successful about what you just did. Or if you didn't do well, you've given yourself no opportunity to learn from that loss or failure or whatever you want to call it. And that it to me it was always counterintuitive, because as an athlete, if I can't stay in front of him defensively, I better figure out something. I can't rely on Coach K to be like, hey, I guess we'll just go into a zone, like, because, homeboy can't keep him in front. Like, no, I better figure out something. And that requires some self-assessment. So I love hearing that, Roger. I love hearing that, hey, we are trying to teach them to be intentional about that reflection, because I think it is definitely a lost, I don't know if it's an art or not, but it's definitely a skill, the set that and it goes into the whole social thing, but they're just on to the next thing, the swipe, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. So it's good to hear that y'all are still, that y'all are still trying to instill that into athletes tonight.
Yeah. So, Coach K, what are you seeing on the team, from guys that, take introspection, or like, do you see guys take, even if it's just watching film where they maybe look inward versus what's on the floor? Do you see that?
We started to do like a little bit of journaling,
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Very good.
When we were trying to figure out like marketing wise, like branding, kind of this new culture, we got these notebooks, just blank notebooks with the cover that had some of our culture on there, value standards. But then we did ask the guys, we talked about process goals versus, result type of goals. But we asked the guys every day, to write down a couple of things, just 10 seconds, 30 seconds, approaching practice. And I think what we saw is some of the guys took that really serious, and their journal went from their locker to, I carry this around and now I have another journal. And some of the guys, I think it helped them reflect. We asked them to do it beforehand and then afterwards. And you probably had some guys that didn't do it, because we wanted to say, it's not something we're coming in and checking. You run if you don't write something down. I didn't think it would be as productive if we managed it that way. So, we tried to give them a tool, and I think it worked for some guys, and other guys, it takes a certain level of vulnerability if you're in front of everybody.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And that's not always easy, but it's giving them the opportunity to do it and then giving them the freedom to choose, because it's one thing to say, okay, guys, I'm going to sit everybody down. You're going to have to spend the first 5 minutes to do this. What I like, if I'm hearing it correctly, is it's like, here's something you can do if you choose to use this journal this way. Maybe you're going to do it as a daily debrief. Maybe you're going to just be more intentional about some of the other things. And it's one of the things I love about the MVP process that I know you all were talking about earlier is, once you've identified the mission, once you've identified what that vision is, what it looks like, what your mission looks like in practice and in theory, is then being intentional about those principles. I've heard you guys mention it a few different times, and Brandon touched on that with Success Leaves Clues, is how do I, we talk about behavior recipes, right? Like, what are the 2 or 3 things I need to be very intentional about that's going to give me that desired result, or at least give me the best chance for that desired result? And Roger, you talked about controlling the controllables earlier, and I've been working with a college baseball player, and one of the things I was talking to him about recently is in any event, any sporting event, there's always those moments where you are going to have a break in the action. For basketball, I would imagine it's mostly probably on the bench where you can focus in on some of the things that you can't control and be intentional about thinking about those things. But once you're out on the court, it now has to shift into that controllable space. So as a defender, what are the 2 or 3 things I need to do consistently to give me the best chance to be a good defensive player? As a shooter, what are the 2 or 3 things I need to do intentionally? Like, just really having that level of repetition to where I know I can control this. But what I told him, I said, is what happens now is, rather than looking at this place of competition as something with angst because you're so worried about, because before you always focused on all the things you can't control. Now, all of a sudden you look at that as a happy place, because now I want to go out on the court because it's the court is where I'm in total control. That's where that whole palms down. What I love about that is that idea, like, that is representing that you're in control. Palms up is I'm out of control. I don't know what to do. Palms down is that mindset of being in complete control. And so now it's something that's a positive experience for you, instead of this place where you go and you've just lost, as we would say, the red lights, right? You're in complete out of control. So a lot of good stuff you guys are working on. Coach, I wanted to ask you, because, you started basketball. And by the way, I do all my research. Don't think for one second we're not going to be talking about the Washington Generals experience that you had. We are definitely going to get into that at the end of this show. We will be talking about the against the Harlem Globetrotters. So that's to come. But you started coaching back in, basically 2009, 2010. What have you noticed? I mean, we're talking about all this, mental performance and getting into the minds and helping players better control what they can control and reaction. How's the player evolved just in your time? Like, what have you noticed about players that maybe surprised you getting into it from a coach perspective versus a player perspective?
I think the number one thing right away was, I thought I was going to instill my mindset in others initially. I feel like I have this good mindset of just work without the expectation of things in return, and then these good things happen. And it was more so, no. How do you learn what the other guys, how he thinks and how he ticks and motivate? How do you motivate him? How do you teach him? And everybody's unique in their own way. I think that was frustrating initially, because I was like, yeah, why can't you do this the way I'm telling you to do it?
Yeah. But it's so simple.
Right. Exactly. But no, I mean, I think these days with phones and stuff like that and Twitter, I mean, instant gratification is, I think, something that is I see more and more. Like, I need to be playing now, like a freshman. Like, I should be playing. Why am I not playing?
Right.
But it's funny, like, I mean, it's a really good, you could be winning. There could be good players in front of you. You could be outplayed in practice, but why am I not playing? Right. And it's just, just wanting something without working for it, or working really hard and you don't actually get the result, even though you worked really, really hard. And that's just like unacceptable these days. Like, man, no, like I feel like not always, but you a lot see now, like I expect something. Why am I not, I should be part of this team. I should be playing, this is the way it should be going. And I'm like, man, this is complete instant gratification. And if not, I'm going to go find that somewhere else.
Yeah. It's the portal. Yeah. I mean, it's the portal.
I don't mind the portal as much as, it's, I think there's a lot of good to it. I don't think it's bad, but, I do see that a lot. Like, man, I can give in like so often. Just looking, the phone drives me crazy. I mean, I use my phone, but like, we pick up their phones at a certain time of the night when we're on the road. Like, give yourself a break, man. Sometimes I'm like, you don't need to know what's going on. Go into a meal, like just talk to somebody. And it just seems so stressful, the comparison game. So like it's instant gratification and then comparing yourself to someone else. I think social media has changed the way I think a lot of youngsters can operate. It could be more stressful, than fun sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think doesn't take away the joy overall.
No, absolutely.
Sorry.
Roger, what have you seen in the 2 years working, was this your first kind of, you'd done some basketball, but I mean, with that college basketball player, was that your first couple of years working with college basketball teams?
Last year was my first year working with some college basketball teams.
Yeah.
And then this year, stayed with Hampden-Sydney. And, again, to what Coach K saying, one of the things that he does drive into the program is connection, and connection with each other. So the last tournament, we were at the ODAC tournament. And so we go out to lunch and, as we're getting off the bus, Coach Long's like, all right, guys, leave your phones on the bus. And I was like, my first thought was, well, there must be like some policy in I don't know. I had some weird thought because it didn't resonate. I just didn't click. And we get in there and I asked, Carson, I'm like, the guys left the phones on the bus. He goes, yeah, we want them to have conversations because what's going to happen. They're going to, if you go into a restaurant and they're at it, everybody's going to be doing this. Right. And it was interesting. It was really loud in the area where we were eating because everybody was talking.
Yeah. And
so there's a lot of things that they do take the phones at night when we're on the road, Yeah. So, and a lot of the guys on the team said, thank you. We're glad you took the phone.
Well,
because they know it's going to be a distraction.
And that's one of the things I know. And I love that so much. And that connection is such a key piece. And I got to tell you, Coach, Roger has definitely made a connection with your program, as you know, because when he was texting me and giving me updates throughout the tournament, when we were trying to organize this and get you guys on here, everything was we won last night. We did this. And I was like, man, that's when you got a good one when they're bought in as well, and I can tell you it does happen when you're working with teams. It's like you become a part of that and it's, you're all about it. And so that's a really good thing. Because I think it's a missing piece, I think a lot of times. And I think you start to, we brought up the portal earlier, but when you're creating that kind of a culture and you're creating that type of connectivity, then it's harder you'd probably have less likely that players are like, hey, I need to go because everybody's kind of lifting each other up. And it's a really good thing. I want to be mindful of your time, but before we, jump off here, when I was doing my research, I was looking through some stuff and I was like, wait a second, did that just say, because I was reading Washington Lead Generals. And then I was like, no, he played for the Washington Generals. How did that come about? Like what, against the Globetrotters every night.
I'm a very, very proud member of the Washington. Yeah. Although we did not win a single game.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it was a great experience. I mean, we traveled the world, for my first year out of college, and I think I went.
Did you try out? Did you know somebody that was with them, or how did that?
It's interesting. They do have like a training camp up in Long Island that I had to go to, but it's not like you have to be you should be animated. You have to kind of have some feel there. You got to be able to play a little bit, but also be a showman in some ways. And you got to be, look, the Generals, they let you know, man, this is not the Washington General show. Don't
get it twisted.
Don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted out here.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned that did not win a game. I was curious about this because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is, did y'all ever win? But so I did some research. The Generals the last time the Generals have beaten the Harlem Globetrotters was the year I was born, 1971. And it was by accident. So, and they weren't even named the Generals. They were called the New Jersey Reds, and they won 100-99 in a game that was right here in Tennessee. It was in Martin, Tennessee, where UT Martin is. And evidently the captain for the New Jersey Reds, a guy by the name of Eddie Mahar, Curly Neal wasn't even playing for the Globetrotters this night. He was hurt or something like this. And so the story talked about how the Globetrotters basically just lost focus, and it was like they were down by 12, but now there was only 2 minutes to go in the game. So now the Globetrotters are like really playing like real basketball for like the last 2 minutes, and it was, not enough, just too little, too late. So they end up losing the game 100-99. And now I think they're riding like a 2,495, game winning streak after that night in Martin, Tennessee. So little history there for you listeners.
They're just that good, They're
just that good. I mean, I am curious. Like, were you ever just feeling it one night and you're like, dude, I'm going to go for like 25 tonight. I don't care whether it's Globetrotters or not. I'm feeling it.
Oh, all the time. There are times they just let you play. You can go out there and And there's other times where you're going to get dunked on. Or
over and over.
It's a great dribbling display, and somehow they beat you on it every time.
Every time. To the right, every time.
Right every time. Not sure how, but for all the 8 to 12-year-olds out there, they're good.
It's great that you brought that up, Coach, because we were there. I took my son. It's been several years, but I did notice they never overplayed to the weak hand at all. Like it was always just straight up and always seemed to get distracted, right?
But you know what? You brought up something that I think a lot of people miss is they are good, though. I mean, like they're still making the half court shot, or they're still making that 3-quarter, like from the logo, and I'm like, yeah, a lot of this is like, hey, everybody is in on it. We know who's going to win at the end of the game, but there's still some dudes that can light it up for the Globetrotters every night, which is pretty impressive, some of the shooting and stuff. So,
knowing the history of the Globetrotters, it was very cool to be a part of it, I think, because it's such a big part of the history of basketball and how really, honestly, some of the African-American players that couldn't be in the NBA early on.
Right.
Were some of the best players in the world playing for the Globetrotters, So now, obviously, it's a lot, you got some guys with a bag of tricks, and you got some guys that can do a lot of different things, jump really high, and girls, that are doing a great job. But no, it's become a very cool thing still. But it was neat to be part of the history. It's cool.
Well, that's awesome. Well, look, I can't thank you enough for jumping on here. As I figured it would, the hour went really fast, but I wanted the listeners, and that's why I was so excited when Roger and I started talking about this, is I wanted the listeners to hear that all of these things that we talk about on a weekly basis, like there's a lot of programs that are starting to put this stuff into play, and it's making a difference. I mean, I can't remember now who it was, but Brandon will remember when the comment was made. Oh, it was Mark Glissini way back in like episode 11, where he said, look, some people may think it's all just a bunch of hocus pocus and what are we going to do? Work on breathing now, and we're going to work on some of this stuff. But when you come up against that team that's completely bought into that mental side of it, and they've completely bought in, you're done. Yeah. I mean, it is done, because I don't care what happens when talent meets talent, and one of them has bought into all the controllables and palms down and Tiger DNA and all that. it's over. Like, so congrats to you guys, not only on a great season, but on just what you're building there. And I think from a culture standpoint, you and Roger kind of working together and that mental side of things, it's exciting. I know that buzz is definitely got to be around Farmville. And so I think all the things that you were trying to get established earlier, yes, it's a work in progress from a standpoint of you never really, it's like I think Jack Leggett, famous coach from Clemson baseball, said on our show that culture is one of those things you continue to build every year because you get a new crop of players in. And so it's going to be something you're going to continue to want to evolve. But as long as you've got the right guys on the bus to begin with, and they're helping you reinforce that, I think you're in the right spot, and you guys are definitely in the right spot. So keep doing what you're doing, Coach. We appreciate you guys. Roger, thanks for jumping on, and wish you all the best of luck in the future for sure.
Yeah, Brandon, John, thank you guys, man. This has been really neat, and let's just hope Roger doesn't get too big where he drops us. I'm going to say it on the podcast. He said he would stick with us. So right there
you go.
Hey, I have it. Hey, call me, Coach. If
we can get the audio to you.
I can get over there in about 3.5 hours for you. So
there we go.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. We appreciate y'all. We'll talk to you soon.
Guys. Great job.
All right, take care. Bye.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.